always, I'm here with Zachary Green, my partner in crime and fellow Marine. And what are we going to talk about today, Zach?
So, sir, I think what would be great for our second episode is to really start to look into what the warrior's voice is, and more importantly, what is the warrior's journey?
Okay. So, I'm a fan of defining terms so that we're all talking about the same thing. So, the warrior's voice, I think that's defined as that intuition, that spidey sense, that thing that when we're doing something, it tells us, yes, we should do this and not do that. And most of the time, it's do this because it's the right thing to do. Now, the warrior's journey is different for all of us. So where does your warrior's journey begin?
Well, I think before we get to the warrior's voice, we have to figure out what is a warrior. And if we look at the Merriam-Webster definition of a warrior, it is one that is engaged in struggle and conflict. Usually it's involving a war, but it could be anything that has struggle or conflict. And so for the warrior to find his voice, for you to be able to accomplish those heroic warrior type deeds, there has to be a process that you go through to make you a warrior.
And that process is different for everyone. But
yes and no.
Some commonalities?
There is a commonality. So when you start looking all the way back to almost the beginning of the written word, the Odyssey, Homer, the Iliad, that warrior's journey is almost identical to what you see all the way through history, and ultimately what happened to you and I as current modern day warriors. And that journey that Homer talked about during the Iliad and the Odyssey is the warrior has to be tested. The warrior has to go through a struggle. And when they make it through that struggle or don't make it through that struggle will be determined on how they prepare themselves for that. And the commonality that we find throughout history is the warriors that are tested and tried, and again, iron sharpens iron, those are the ones that tend to get through that crucible better than the ones that had it kind of easy in their life.
Okay, fair enough. That makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about adversity. So adversity is different for everyone. Some of my earliest memories of adversity, and this is of course looking back several years, is in East Cleveland, Ohio, predominantly black neighborhood. And at the time I was probably an at-risk youth in the sense that I had not focused on making education a priority, running around with gangs and drinking alcohol and doing things that were borderline, wind me up in the correctional facility, was easy. So the adversity was there. Looking back, what are some of your earliest memories of adversity?
So it's funny because my adversity was there. It looked very different. And I think ultimately that adversity prepared us to become Marines and ultimately warriors. I struggled very deeply with learning disabilities growing up. I had really bad ADHD, very fluent parents, lived in very nice neighborhoods. They both had great jobs. They were both very loving to my brother and myself. But I went to about 6 different schools from kindergarten all the way through high school. I went to Montessori schools, private schools, public schools, parochial schools, and none of them seemed to work for me. It was like a square peg going into a round hole.
Okay.
For me, ADHD is actually a superpower. They call it a disability. I think it's a superpower. It's an ability. And the reason I say that is you have ADHD when you're in school, but when you get out of school, it's called multitasking. And then all of a sudden there's this great thing like, oh, he's a great multitasker. He could do all this stuff. As an entrepreneur, they said, Zach is amazing because he's so energetic and he can do so many things at once and he can carry on multiple conversations and handle all this chaos that comes at him with no problem. Well, those are the same things in school that got me suspended time and time again. So I think like you, I was on a bad trajectory. Now, I didn't do anything illegal, but I was in trouble all the time, constantly getting suspended, constantly in the principal's office. And it wasn't until I went to Roger Bacon High School, a Catholic school, a Franciscan school in the Cincinnati area that was interesting. My motivation was their mascot was the Spartan. And the more I learned about the Spartan, playing football there and playing wrestling and ultimately in track and field, the more I realized that I wanted to be a Spartan. And the way that the Spartans accomplished their mission and conquered their crucible was they had a really, really tough childhood and a really tough program to prepare them to become Spartans.
Absolutely. And in listening to you, Zach, I was thinking about, you said you didn't do anything illegal. I think the statute of limitations on the stuff, I don't think it was illegal, but,
Yeah.
but it's all.
You're good now, sir. As long as they're misdemeanors, I think we're safe. You know.
Yeah, the adversity piece, as you unpack it, it's almost therapeutic because single parent, my mom raised us, and may she rest in peace, and she did the best that she could in a neighborhood where not everyone had a job, not everyone had a vehicle per se, and it was just that's what we're supposed to do. But then something clicked. That warrior voice clicked, and I believe I was probably in 9th or 10th grade at Shaw High School, and I've got to do something else because most of my peers, most of my friends were either locked up or gangbanging or doing something that was not hurling East Cleveland in a positive trajectory. So I think that's when my warrior voice started to kindle, started to smoke a little bit. When did that start to happen for you?
You know, since a very early age, I was just fascinated by the United States Marine Corps. I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and I dressed up as G.I. Joe for Halloween, and I was G.I. Joe every single year after that. I remember vividly, in 8 or 9 years old, my grandparents lived in Los Angeles. We took the train down to San Diego. We went to Camp Pendleton, and for me, it was amazing. And I remember seeing one of the Marines and telling them, I'm ready to sign up right now. And they said, okay, you're 8 years old. That's great. Why don't you come back in 10 years when you're 18 and we'll talk about it. But they gave me this poster, and I'm sure the poster is one you absolutely remember. It was one of the most iconic Marine Corps posters of all time, and it was the Marine that was fully camouflaged up with face paint. He had his K-bar knife on there, and in bright silver foil letters at the bottom it said Marines. That stayed on my wall next to, of course, the poster of the Ferrari, my two favorite things, and really took me through that. And so I knew that drove me. But the reason I wanted to join the Marine Corps, and I'd be interested to hear about it for you, was because it was the hardest. You know, if you take 2 people and they both decide they want to summit a mountain, and one person gets gets on a train and then has a vehicle waiting for him, and they make it to the top of the mountain, and they're really excited. But the warrior says, I'm not going to just take the trail. I'm going to hike up the backside of the mountain. Now, they both got to the same place, but when the warrior gets to the top of that mountain and the challenge and the difficulty that they had, not only are they going to have that sense of pride that's so incredible, which is why it's really easy to tell a Marine, because they've got the Marine sticker on their car, they got the tattoo, they got the Marine flag in front of them. They make sure everyone knows they're a Marine because their pride that they went through that suffering. And so that guy gets to the top of that mountain, he not only has that great sense of accomplishment, but also he's better prepared for the next thing that comes ahead versus somebody else that may have just had that. So tell me about how you decided to get into the Marine Corps.
So Zach, coming out of Shaw High School in East Cleveland, Ohio, when it clicked that I need to get out of here, I started leaning more towards theater and debate, and the speech team, Bonnie O'Leary was our speech coach, and she saw that in me, that talent, the ease of going into public speaking. And she spoke with the guidance counselor, Carol Keski. She was our guidance counselor, and she said, hey, did you think about going to Ithaca College? Like, what is that? I had no idea what she was talking about. And, well, it's in upstate New York, and you'd be great. And I said, okay, and did all the paperwork. The application was accepted to Ohio State also. Didn't go there. But while at Ithaca, I was going through the motions, and that was my first culture shock. Because Ithaca, a predominantly Jewish school at the time. Not sure how much that has changed. Not that was bad. It was just definitely different than East Cleveland. So hammered through Ithaca College, great time there. Some other things that I experienced there we'll unpack in another episode. But as my senior year was approaching, I was at a point where, okay, once I graduate, what am I going to do? Was I going to go back to East Cleveland or do something else? And this was 1988. And at that time, General Frank Peterson, he had just retired from the Marine Corps, and that was our first African-American general officer, and he retired as a lieutenant general. And some of the churn of low minority numbers were still that cloud around the Marine Corps. I had not dug into all that at the time. I just knew that the Marines had great uniforms. It's the hardest service. So I went down to the recruiter there in Ithaca, raised my right hand, did delayed entry in January of 1989.
Now, were you still in college at
I
that
was
time, or
still
you
in
graduated
college.
yet?
It didn't tell a soul. My
Okay.
family, no one. Graduated. I sold everything in my apartment there in Ithaca. Got on a bus, went back to East Cleveland, and let my family know I joined the Marine Corps.
I bet they were real happy, weren't they?
They couldn't believe it.
That sounds familiar. Sounds like my family.
My mother was like, well, how does that tie into Ithaca? It did not connect for her.
That
But
was
for
not
me,
cute.
I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do the hardest, and I wanted to serve. I was trying to seek understanding about this Marine Corps, and I was only going to serve 4 years. That was my original intent. I got a lot more than I bargained for.
I should say so. So it's funny because I kind of had that similar movement as I started to get into high school. Really realized that I'm going to do this. It wasn't if or anything else. And my grandparents, very aristocratical Jewish grandparents that don't believe you should use your hands to work for a living. Everyone in my family are either lawyers or musicians, and nobody in our family. I think we have one distant relative that served in the Civil War. Other than that, we don't have anybody really that in my immediate family that served. So my grandparents found out about this place down in Harlingen, Texas, called Marine Military Academy. And it is actually a Marine Corps base that is set up that looks as accurate as MCRD San Diego or Parris Island as you can get. They even have the exact same Iwo Jima memorial that we have at Parris Island. They have the original. So those were actually 4 or 5 statues that were created by Felix Weldon as he was getting ready to cast the full-size Iwo Jima memorial in Northern Virginia. So I get down there, and it's run by all former sergeant majors, master gunnery sergeants, colonels, generals, and everything. They're still in their full uniform, but it's a boarding school for kids, mostly bad kids. So they went through a 2-week simulated boot camp in the summertime. Now, this is the summer. Do you think Parris Island's hot in the summer? We're in Harlingen, Texas. It is the southernmost point of all of Texas, and it is humid, and it is brutal, and there are bugs down there too. It was horrible. I hated every second of it. It was 2 weeks of just complete, drilling, getting up at dark 30, drilling all day and everything. But when I got home, I had the greatest sense of pride and accomplishment because I knew how hard it was, and I made through that, and that prepared me. And from that point on, there was no question in my mind I was going to be a Marine. Now, my grandparents were upset. They're playing backfire. They're going to show me, do you really want this? But for me, no, I really did. And so that was kind of getting me ready and to let me know that that's what I wanted to do. So I wanted to be an officer. My dream was always to become a Marine, career Marine officer. But I knew that the best officers were the Mustangs. Now, sir, tell us a little bit about what a Mustang officer is.
So a Mustang officer is an officer who enlists first and then transitions through a number of different paths into the officer ranks. So for me, enlisting in 1989, went through boot camp here, Marine Corps Recruit Depot, Parris Island, platoon 2069, the greatest platoon ever to go through there.
And so tell us what special thing happened just a few months ago.
Just a few months ago, as I marked my 32nd year in the Marine Corps, General Nethercott was gracious enough to allow me to run with platoon 2069. And I told the general, said, ma'am, I don't want a ceremony or anything. All I want is to run with my alma mater.
Want to be back with the guys, the hogs.
Was unbelievable. But she allowed me to do that.
To realize what a big deal this is, this is a regimental commander, a full bird colonel. And he said, you know what? I'm a Marine before I'm a colonel. I'm a Marine before I'm an officer. I'm a Marine. And I want to go back to that time when I went through probably your first major crucible, which would have been MCRD.
Absolutely.
Parris Island, boot camp.
And boot camp was bad enough. My crucible was at the pool. Because in East Cleveland, we weren't swimmers. There was a community pool, but that's not where I was hanging out. Swimming was not a priority or on our to-do list in the summertime. So arriving at the pool in camis, with the gear.
So let's back up for a second, because the pool phase is usually about week 4 or 5 or week 3.
Somewhere, yeah, about.
So take me through from East Cleveland. You're a badass, right? You a tough guy.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. We get down there. Take me through what happened from the yellow footprints up to pool.
That's a setup. You know what happened from the yellow footprints.
I know, but I want to hear it from you.
It is a painful.
First of all, what is the yellow footprints?
So the yellow footprints is where the journey begins, and that's a great question. So the yellow footprints are outside building 6,000 aboard Parris Island, and we roll in there pitch black, and that hasn't changed. 0 dark 30. You're disoriented because you've been up for a while. Your head is down because you're on the bus, and if you can fall asleep, you get a little bit of rest because you're not going to rest again for a couple of days. They tell you to get off the bus in a very loud tone, and you're moving at a very rapid pace, just short of running, and everything is a blur for the first few weeks. You do an initial strength test, initial physical training test. You get your height, weight, you get your hair buzzed off. I mean, all these things are occurring as you're adjusting to what this thing that is boot camp. So, I kind of, all that's kind of a blur for me, but the pool is crystal clear because...
Now, you knew this was coming up when you were there, or did you not know?
That's a great question. I had no familiarity with the Marine Corps. My uncles were in the Air Force and the Army and the Navy. There was no player in the Marine Corps lineage, so I was the first one. I didn't do any research. There was no, Google it. There were no videos. There was no TikTok. There was none of that stuff kind of prepping me to unpack what is boot camp.
Now, up to this point where we went to the pool, were there times that you didn't think you were able to do something and they basically said, you're a recruit, you're doing it, and I don't even want to hear anything about it?
Were there any times like that? Not necessarily. Everything on land, I was good. I could figure it out.
Okay.
But the pool, that was a game changer.
That was your kryptonite.
Absolutely. Because getting out of high school, I had to swim maybe 10 feet, you jump in shorts. There was no time where you jump in full gear with boots on and navigate the pool. So everything in me was froze, literally. So they say, all right, recruit player, jump in. I jumped in, and I'm trying to move, and they're just looking down at me, and I'm on the bottom of the pool. And then when I woke up, they were like, we got some work to do. So I hammered through, I gutted through the pool. And
now, let's stop there for a second. So you're at the bottom of the pool, which I think is a really interesting analogy of what the abyss is, because you really were in the abyss, right?
Yes.
You fell to the bottom of that hole. I imagine it got black. Did it get black?
I just saw, it was just kind of, all I knew is I couldn't get up there to get air.
And you're now starting to go unconscious. You're starting to have some issues. So you were at your bottom of your crucible, and at that point in time, take us through what happened when you came through the water, and because you probably don't remember that, you probably just remember coming to.
Yes, and they said we got work to do, and as I was lying there, there were a couple of drill instructors that said he's not going to make it. Let's just I can't recall the term, but quit. He's not going to make it. Quit. This is it. All those things were kind of going through my head, and they're yelling because I remember laying down and then rolling up and looking around and saying, okay, am I going to figure this out or am I going to quit?
Because even though at recruit training, it's almost impossible to quit. I imagine if you just raised your hand at that point in time and said, I cannot go back in that water, they would have started working your way out. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And I think that's interesting because all warriors have that opportunity in the abyss. Now, you had a literal and figurative abyss here. And that is to make a decision to transform and change or stay at that abyss. Because if you chose not to learn how to swim and not to do that, and there may have been another point later in your life where you were encountered the pool, you would have been in a potentially lethal situation.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that at Officer Candidate School, where the pool popped up again. But boot camp, I never learned the fundamentals of swimming with all the gear on. And there was a swimming guru, I'll call him a guru, but they had all of the iron ducks is what they called them. Mostly African American who did not go to the pool when they were younger. And I was part of the Iron Duck Brigade, and they taught me full lung of air, the different strokes, and how to move your pack while it's wet, how to make a flotation, all those things to get just the fundamentals to get in and out of the pool. And fortunately, I was able to do that.
And what does your son do for a living in the summertime?
So that's funny. So for our children, we have 4 children. Before they could play any sports, they had to learn how to swim first because it's a life skill. So that crucible taught me, for my lineage, hey, you'll learn how to swim. But my middle son, he's a lifeguard.
There you go. So again, a perfect example of not just a warrior, but a leader. A warrior is somebody that looks at that crucible, looks at that challenge, overcomes it, not just overcomes it, conquers it, And a leader is someone that develops other leaders. So you, as a father, which is the ultimate leader there is, I believe, have now inspired your children to say, not only are you going to learn how to swim, he's now the person rescuing other people. It's kind of interesting how that's all come full circle now.
Absolutely. And Zach, you talk all the time, iron sharpening iron. That's the key. And what better iron to sharpen than our children?
Exactly. So it's funny because I think that my crucible, my journey was almost identical and probably only happened a couple 100 feet from where you had yours. Up to that point in time in my life, I had a lot given to me. I had a lot of things that I didn't realize the advantages I had. But when I went to the Yellow Footprints and you're sitting down there and you're going through that process of getting in, I'm looking around and I'm seeing kids from the inner city that I never hung out with. I'm seeing guys from the coal mines in Appalachia, in Kentucky and West Virginia. The inner city is the Taj Mahal compared to where these guys are staying. I mean, the poverty is amazing. I'm seeing, good old farm boys that worked out in the middle of the fields that, they were getting up at the time a lot of people were going to bed and they were out there baling hays and everything. And I realized that I didn't have that iron sharpen me like these other recruits did. And I had a lot of arrogance. I'm 18 years old. I was captain on my hockey team. I wrestled. I played football. I did all this type of things. My PFT was almost spot on perfect when I got down there. But the one thing I couldn't get was drill. Drill takes a lot of focus and dedication to keep in mind. Mr. ADHD here, we're walking along that Pietros parade deck, and I'm just looking around trying to see what's going on, and they don't ever want you looking around. And so sure enough, we're marching, the platoon goes left, and I turn right. And all of a sudden, the entire platoon collapsed on itself. And one of the best ways to really upset your drill instructors is to screw up drill when things are going good. And so they pulled me aside and identified for me what's called IPT, Incentive Physical Training. Now, IPT is basically the drill instructor's way to completely abuse you without touching you. It starts usually with high knees, where you stand up and you raise your knees up as high as you can. You go jump back and forth. Then it goes down to push-ups. And then just when you think your pecs are about ready to give out, you do bends and thrusts, which is push-ups. Then you jump up. Then you go back down. Then they get you on your back and you're doing flutter kick. And they're doing it so fast that you can't keep up with it. And all of a sudden, I just started to fail. And the drill instructor leans over to me and he whispers in my ear, "Your mommy and daddy aren't here to help you anymore." And for some reason, that knife cut so deep into me, because my mom and dad had always given everything. They had taken care of me. Heck, I'm not really embarrassed. It is what it is. My mom literally laid my clothes out for me my senior year in high school. That's how our family, worked. We take really, really good care, to the point of a problem, actually. So I started to cry and I collapsed. And all of a sudden, when he made those comments that my parents weren't there to help me, then I really started to hysterically cry. I curled up in a prenatal position. And then he said those words to me that set me on my trajectory that I'm on today that I'll never look back on. He said, "I always knew you were a quitter, and I always knew you weren't going to make it." And it's funny because they said the same thing to you when you were at the bottom of your crucible. And I imagine every Marine that's walked through those footsteps have heard those same words at some point in time. Now, going back to you, I imagine some of the challenges that you had growing up in school, they probably said, "Riccoh, you're not going to make it. You're going to end up in jail. You're going to do this." And we heard that stuff, but you and I both knew, and warriors know, we're destined for something greater. We've got something really big out there. The world is our oyster, and we're going to go after it, and God has put us on this earth for a reason. And that was my bottom. And from that point on, I transformed and changed. That was my crucible. Now, at the bottom of that crucible was my abyss, which was not getting off of that parade deck, or potentially harming myself, which can happen from time to time. Or in your case, not getting back in the water, period. But because we're warriors, we then transform and change. And then once you make that transform and change, and for me was, I'm not going to listen to anybody tell me I'm not good enough. I'm not going to listen to anybody tell me I'm not smart enough. And I'm going to accomplish anything that someone puts in front of me, because I know if I can't do it myself, my brothers and sisters around me are going to help me out, and we're going to figure out a way how to do that. And that's carried on through life. And that really is the ethos of what the warrior's voice is. And that's what we really want to spend the next several episodes, actually all of our episodes, is finding out what that voice is and that framework in all of you. And we're going to share story after story after story of resistance, challenge, iron sharpening iron, crucible, abyss, conquering. And some people may fall to the bottom of the abyss and not get up. and those that are able to conquer and make it through.
And Zach, I think you highlighted something that I hope folks who tune in they realize that in everyone you're a bit more warrior-like than you might think. I think there's a little bit of warrior. I know there's a warrior voice in everyone. How much you want to activate that warrior voice, to use it, to listen to it, that's what I think we will continue to unpack as we move forward on this journey.
And you're so right. So the human biology is absolutely fascinating. There is a anatomic system which is the way your brain works and the way everything comes together, called the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And it basically translates to fight or flight. You got a big bear coming at you, you got two choices. You're going to fight it or you're going to flee. And your body's going to cause certain things to happen that's going to make those changes. Now, what we're learning is there's actually a third phase too, and that's freeze. Fight, flight, or freeze. And one of the things, we'll really get into some details, and I'm hoping we've got some doctors that we can bring on here and really talk about what happens when cortisol gets released as a result of the sympathetic nervous system, or adrenaline, and how it increases your breathing and increases the blood flow to your brain, and how your eyes dilate. You know, if you've ever been in a car accident, or anyone's been in a car accident before, the second before impact, almost everyone says the same thing. Everything slows down. It goes into slow motion. That's your body's natural reaction of saying, hey, something big's going to happen and we need to get ready for it. The warrior is going to use that as something to help give them those superpowers. The person that hasn't yet embraced that warrior spirit is going to use that, and they're going to fall apart. And again, we'll talk some more about that.
Absolutely fascinating.
So now we've made it through swim qual. Talk about when you finally did have to go back and do your final swim to pass that evolution.
It was mission complete. I like a warrior wants to learn. A warrior embraces knowledge. So I decided I'm going to pass this. I'm going to listen to the instructors, and I'm going to get my swim qualification. And that's exactly what occurred. And I'm a checklist guy. So as they were saying these things, I'm repeating them. They don't know it. I'm repeating it low enough for it to register in my brain. Hey, I need to do this. Full breath of air. And that was the main thing. Full breath of air. Full breath of air. And I gutted through it. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't wonderful. But it was a personal accomplishment for me, and it was a requirement to get to graduate. So I stored that away and built swimming into my PT as I traveled throughout the Marine Corps. So that crucible, that low point, that test flipped the switch, and I made the decision at that time, whatever the challenge, no excuses, find solutions.
Gotcha. So let's go ahead and fast forward a little bit after that point in time. Were there any other crucibles that you had in your life outside of the Marine Corps that you think that confidence and all those things, that honor, that courage, commitment the Marines taught you, that helped you get through those crucibles?
Early on, Zach, I would say probably just a survival mode in East Cleveland. It wasn't a combat zone, but there were enough distractions, enough things right on the border of go to jail or go to school kind of deal that tested me every day. It was easy to not seek success. And I think the one thing, there were a few folks in my village, in the sense that Miss Marjorie Russell is a prime example. A good friend of mine growing up, John Russell, and I were like two peas in a pod. And one day as we were going to his house, there were some older guys sitting on the stump drinking beer and just kind of harassing the young guys who walked by. And we were walking, and John had his bike, and they were egging us on to fight over the bike. And before I knew it, we were brawling over John's bike. And his mother came flying out of there. She came, snatched us both up, and gave us a lecture that it seemed like it lasted forever. But she cared about us, and she knew that we're brothers. We're not supposed to be fighting. And her saying that, sometimes in the crucible, especially in the Marine Corps, there are folks that you're in the fighting hole with. You're slugging it out. You're chewing the same sand, and that bond is unbreakable. You've shared the same pain. I believe it translates to the civilian world as well. When folks are in any horrific, like the tornadoes that were in Kentucky recently, the floods that are going on in Hawaii, those things, when people survive those things, they're bound together. And that in itself is a warrior spirit. That's the warrior's voice, helping them to survive. Those are the things that transcend occupation. They transcend service, and all of us have that in us.
And I think that goes all the way back to the Roman legions and the biblical warriors that we saw all the way to current day, as they all suffer together. And when you're willing to suffer together, then that gives you that bond, and that gives you that connection there.
Absolutely.
Well, my warrior journey, the second one for me, happened when I started my business. And we'll talk a little bit more here in the future episodes about my business and how it got started. But it was really difficult. Early on, those first couple of years, just simply to make payroll was a constant slug, because every dollar that came in, I wanted to spend it on buying more materials or more marketing so I could sell more product. But I had to make payroll. And again, once you don't make payroll, and again, as great as people were, they got to work, and they got to take money home to their kids. And so what I did, the first sacrifice that I made, and that is a common thread with warriors, is making those sacrifices. And I'm sure you had sacrifices in Cleveland where you wanted to hang out with the cool kids and stuff, but you knew that was not probably the right trajectory it was going to take you on, so you made a sacrifice to not do that. And looking back on it, it's probably not a big deal now, but when you're 9, 10, 11 years old, that's a huge deal. I mean, your whole entire world revolves around that stuff.
Right.
So for me, I didn't take an income. I actually lived off of credit cards for my first 2 to 3 years when I started my business. So not only was I using my money to pay other people to work there, I'm racking up debt over and over again. So finally, the business started to take off, and we were doing well. We were actually making really good revenue, but we weren't very profitable. And never mistake revenue and profitability.
Right.
You can have a company that makes $1 million a year, but if they've got a 2 or 3% profit margin, they're not taking home that much money. Then you have another company that makes $100,000 a year, but maybe they're selling something at a 50 or 60% profit margin. They could actually be taking home more money. And for me, my crucible happened. So I had a lot of resistance, a lot of challenge. Every 2 weeks, it seemed like I had to do everything I could to figure out how we were going to make payroll.
Okay.
And my crucible really happened. It was very visceral and very real, and it even upsets me to talk about it this day. And that is, I finally went on vacation to Hawaii. We have a beautiful place out there that we go to every year. I went with my family. Now, usually vacation for me is just moving my laptop to another room. It's just no real difference. But this one, I said, I'm going to check out. I'm going to really be present for my family, spend some time with my son and wife. And I told my CFO, don't call me unless there's an emergency. Well, guess what? 3 days later, I get the phone call. Very steady, non-emotional voice said, we're going out of business. You have to prepare yourself for liquidation when you get back, which also is probably going to be bankruptcy. Now, at this point in time, I'd given up a very high-paying job at Eli Lilly and Company. I was working my way up the corporate ladder. My wife was extremely successful OBGYN. She had quit her job to be able to give me the opportunity to travel and to build that up. The company owed over $150,000 to American Express. Now, Amex, when you don't pay your Amex bill, they send lawyers after you. They don't mess with collection agencies or phone calls. They get lawyers after you. In addition to that, I owed close to $500,000 to the bank that my house had personally guaranteed as collateral on that. So not only am I going to lose my business, I'm going to lose my identity, I'm going to lose my house, and I don't know what the heck is going to happen. And for me, I manifested all of that into what I thought was a heart attack. I collapsed down to the ground, started crying. My wife's leaned over me, my son's crying, and I could feel the tightness in my chest and these chills running down my arm, which was everything they taught us as a firefighter about what you need to address if you see somebody that's a heart attack. Well, my wife diagnosed me rather quickly, hey, you're not having a heart attack, you're having a panic attack. The best thing you can do from a panic attack is to just go out and relax. So I walked downstairs. I remember I was just like literally in a fog, and I dove into this gorgeous blue lagoon that was right in front of our timeshare that we had there. And I remember, just like you had in the water, at the bottom of that lagoon was failure. I wouldn't say I thought about it, but the thought did enter my mind, what if I just went to the bottom of this abyss? Because then I could get away from all this challenge and the troubles and everything else that was going to happen there. And the other option was to come out of that water. And the way I come out of the water, I had to transform. And that's exactly what happened. And I think there's a real symbolism in coming through water from the Christian faith and baptism. And in my case, feeling that rebirth and change. And I remember having a conversation with God saying that if this is all I'm supposed to do, then thank you so much for this opportunity to help firefighters, to be able to help the environment. But if there's something more out there, I still got some gas left in this engine. And for me, all those challenges I had early on prepared me for that moment. And as a result of that, we were able to go back, call in some favors for some of our vendors. We were able to delay some payments. I was actually able to work with another fellow veteran that had started a company that did short-term loans, and he was able to give me a very quick emergency infusion of cash, and I was able to transform that. But the change that I made was I stepped down as CEO of the company that I started. Now, this is very difficult. This is my baby. I created it, and I appointed someone as a CEO over me to make those decisions, and it's the greatest thing I did. Because of that, I grew our company into about a $30 million company that is still just rocking it today. So as both of us, we come to the end of this discussion here, we both had our experiences where iron sharpened iron. We both got to the end of our abyss, the end of our rope, but because we are warriors and we were Marines, we were not only able to overcome those crucibles, we conquered them. And my legacy was having a company that's been very successful, that is now distributed by Home Depot. And your legacy, which I think is the greatest, most honorable legacy, you've taught your son how to save people from the water.
Outstanding.
It's pretty deep.
Thank you. So, Zach, who do you want to dedicate this episode to?
Great. So as we come to the end, we dedicate one to one of our fallen brothers or sisters. In my case, it's Major Guy Bear Terry. I actually hold his bracelet. I wear it every single day. Guy grew up in my neighborhood. His nickname was the Bear. They called him the Bear because he was about 6'8" and about 300 pounds and almost solid muscle. He went to West Point, but he had the distinct honor of being the GOAT at West Point, which is the person that graduates in last place. I was in the Army, ended up joining the Special Forces community, ran operations during Desert Storm with the Kurds and did a lot of work over there. Was very well known within the Special Forces community. Bear was loved and well known. And when he got out of the Special Forces, he started doing government contracting, did a lot of work for the State Department, and one of his big assignments was protecting Fox News. So he was in charge of a team of other operators that were all prior Special Forces. But Guy was pretty well known, being this big guy walking around, and he had a bounty out on his head. And unfortunately, it came to a head when a roadside bomb was detonated next to the Suburban that he was riding in that wasn't properly armored. He lost both of his legs, and as he was being medevaced out, he actually bled out. So was one of the more high-ranking Marine or Special Forces soldiers at that time to lose his life. He was also a captain of the Seattle Police Department and ran their SWAT program. And so his funeral was pretty incredible, both having Army, Special Forces, and that he unfortunately left behind a very, very young daughter. And this was supposed to be one of his last missions where he could go ahead and pocket that money that he was making as a government contractor and take care of her. So for that, I dedicate this episode to my brother, Guy Bear Terry.
Thank you.
Well, sir, thank you so much for this great time today, and let's finish it like we always do, Semper Fidelis.
Semper Fidelis.